Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to AIAF webinar for Asia, Middle East, and Africa. I'm delighted to moderate this distinguished panel. I can see we have lots of football experts among the panel as well as among our participants, the list that I can read from the chat. So welcome everyone, and I encourage everyone to raise his thoughts or questions through the Q&A through the webinar. So before we start, maybe to introduce myself, my name is Saleh Alobeidli from the United Arab Emirates. I'm a member of the International Football Lawyer Association, AIAF, and we have a distinguished panel here. And before we start, we have Patricia, the president of AIAF, with us to introduce AIAF in few words. Patricia, the mic with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Patricia Moyersoen, speaking from Paris. I'm the president of the International Football Lawyer Association, AIAF, which has been created 8 years ago. This association gathers more than 110 lawyers who are all experts in football law. And we have two objectives in our association. First, sharing between us our experience, our thoughts, but also share our experience with others, other lawyers, our dear colleagues, but also our purpose is to share these thoughts with all the football stakeholders. So we are used to organize conferences every year. Our conferences, we used to invite the main stakeholders, FIFA, continental, national, and each year our conference is we held it in different countries, in different continents. Due to COVID-19, our next conference, which should be held in Rio de Janeiro, we had to postpone it. Nevertheless, we think that it's very important not only to get in touch and to be able to share between us inside the association, but also to share our experience with all our colleagues and with the stakeholders. And this webinar, this is the first session of webinar we are organizing, is focused on the effects and consequences of COVID-19 on players and coach contracts. It's a very, very interesting topic, and we have decided to organize 3 sessions. The first one was held 2 years ago, focused on European countries. The second one was held yesterday, focused on Latin America and Central America issues. And it was held in Spanish. And this third one is very important, focused on the region of Africa, Middle East and Asia. And I'm very happy to see you and to see that you are in good health, my dear friends. All the speakers who have decided and accepted to dedicate time to this seminar, I would like to thank you in advance, because I'm sure it will be very interesting. They are all AIAF members, and it's fantastic for AIAF to have you online, to be able to see you, and hope we will be able to see in real in few months. But now I think it's the good time to try to be alive. The association should stay alive and to share our thoughts on this topic. We will have another AIAF webinar talking about transfers in time of COVID-19, transfer loan. But today we have decided to focus on what is going on in each country, since it's very important for everyone to understand how each country, the law, national law, but also the member association federation are facing this situation regarding players and coach contracts. So I give the floor to Saleh, who is going to moderate this webinar, and I'm going to listen you right now. You have the floor, my dear colleagues, and thank you very much.
Again, thank you, Patricia. And yes, it's my pleasure to moderate this session. And hopefully all our colleagues are very well and stay safe during this difficult time. So just before I move to the speakers, just to mention that the matter at hand, as everyone is aware, due to the COVID-19, the whole world is struggling, and it's affected the world of football. Most leagues around the world has been suspended, or some of them have been already terminated for the current season. And FIFA have issued a guidelines that I believe all of you have aware of, this FIFA guidelines, which try to govern and regulate this current difficult period that no one has expected or precedented in the past. And following the FIFA guideline, most of the football federations around the world also implemented measures or new regulation or whatever structure to also try to regulate this difficult moment. So we are here to present to you the measures that have been taken by football federations in some of the countries in Asia, Middle East, and Africa. We have with us from China, Qing, and then we will have Nan Sato speaking from New York, but about Japan. And then we will have Bandar, our colleague Bandar, speaking about the situation in Saudi Arabia. Then before Bandar, I forget myself, I'll just talk briefly about the situation of UAE. Then we have our friend Ettore speaking about the situation in Qatar, and our friend from Cameroon, Mr. Jean, speaking about the situation in Cameroon. And finally, with Nasr Azzam speaking about the situation in Cairo. So I'll give the mic now to Quinn to give us what's going on in China.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead.
That's great. Good afternoon. I am Qing from China, from Shanghai, have a side law firm. And thanks for having me at this webinar. And I will introduce briefly the situation in China. And as you may know, the 2020 season was originally scheduled to start in the beginning of March in China and end in the end of November. But due to the spread of COVID-19, the Chinese Football Association, CFA, announced on very early January the 30th that it would postpone the start of the 2020 season in China for all levels of football competition. And now the 2020 season has not started yet. We understand that clubs are under some pressure now. Before introducing the specific national measures in Chinese football industry, I think it's necessary to briefly introduce the relationship between the Chinese Super League, the CFA, and the 16 Chinese Super League clubs in order to better understand the special management structure of the Chinese Football League. We know that CFA, the Chinese Football Association, is not only responsible for the management of related matters in the Chinese football industry, but also the largest shareholder of the Chinese Super League company, holding 36% of the shares, and the remaining 64% are held by the 16 clubs. And the CFA not entitled to dividends, but has a right to vote, which is very important. That is to say, because of CFA's nature to be the industry association and its position as a major shareholder in the Chinese Super League company, it publish and pass on policies and guidance, they will be respected and implemented by all the clubs. In order to understand the measures affecting players and coaches' contract, it's very important to learn about CFA's attitude and opinion upon the outbreak of coronavirus, which was unexpected, and the CFA's response to it. So we see the CFA did talk about the reduction of salaries. First of all, after FIFA released the COVID-19 football regulatory issues on April the 7th, I think, as relevant guidelines for handling players' contract and transfer, the CFA quickly responded and convened representatives of clubs of all levels on April the 9th, two days later, to hold online seminars to discuss. They all expressed respect for the FIFA guidelines and CFA's guidance. This meeting on April the 9th determined the consensus for reduction of salaries as a possible measure that could be taken by clubs who are really in need. And the period is from March the 1st to the start of the 2020 season, which dates that we have not known for sure now. And since then, on April 22nd, the CFA specifically approved a joint statement for the reduction of salaries, but it is a recommendation only. It is recommended that the salary reduction ratio for players and coaches is no less than 30%. And how to make the payment, it put forward two proposals. Either clubs shall pay the reduced salaries which was agreed upon with the team due on time every month. Either before the 2020 season starts, the club only pay monthly salaries according to the local minimum wage standard, which would be a lot of less than the contract, or 10% of the monthly salaries under contract, and they take whichever is higher. And after the competition starts, the unpaid part of reduced salaries during the reduction period will be made up until the end of season. So these are the main measures recommended by the Chinese Football Association under this very special and difficult time of coronavirus. And I would like to further explain the following points. Firstly, as you may already know, the Chinese Super League has not established a professional league or player union as many other countries have done that. So it is impossible to discuss and negotiate the reduction of salaries through these organizations. Because of the special status of Chinese Football Association, as I have explained in the Chinese Football Professional League, its opinions and recommendations have great impact on players and coaches' contract with clubs, especially regarding remuneration, and which cannot be ignored. Secondly, I know there is no like temporary unemployment status or partial activity in France or such mechanism in China. So there is no way for clubs to rely on government relief and get money from government to pay the players and coaches in case of substantial salary cuts or even stop paying. But the Chinese government still provides support, for example, for fighting the coronavirus and for controlling the spread, which is almost achieved in China now. The government has provided free testing for all teams and free treatment for players who are unfortunately confirmed positive. And the infected players and employees from the club in Chinese Super League and League One have all healed and recovered. And thirdly, the Chinese Football Association's recommendation affecting players and coaches' contract is mainly concerning a salary reduction proposal. And the period is from, as I have said, March 1st to the start of 2020 season. And we don't know exactly when it will start. And at a recommended ratio of no less than 30%. But as to Chinese players and foreign players in Chinese clubs, although the guidance of CFA makes no difference, but actually the employment contracts with Chinese players apply the regulations and rules of CFA rather than our national labor law, and it is easier for both parties to reach agreement upon salary reduction. However, for foreign player and coaches, it is, I can say, not so easy for the club to negotiate or agree with them on the same issue. Even in some cases, actually, we can see in some cases, the employment contracts of some foreign players have been clearly provided that there will be a clear provision in the contract that obtaining 100% of the salaries is the premise to sign the contract in the very beginning. So that's why I say it might be not that easy for clubs to negotiate with foreign players and coaches. And fourthly, up to today, we see only one Chinese club of Chinese League One has officially announced that its players and coaches have all agreed to implement a 10% to 50% salary reduction. You may notice that the ratio and method are different from CFA's recommendation as 30%. Some clubs are still waiting and see, but there's one thing that we should note. In China, there are actually fewer, not that many clubs responding to CFA's recommendation. And there are some reasons, as I will explain. First of all, although the CFA has a decisive position in the Chinese Super League, the salary reduction plan is only we can see it is only an internal proposal for guidance and has no mandatory effect on clubs, players, and coaches. Secondly, in addition to the enactment of a policy a little bit similar to the European financial fair play that restricts clubs, recently the CFA has also implemented a salary cap system for all players from this year. So that's quite a new reform in Chinese Football League. They start to implement a salary cap system. So domestic players' annual salaries should not exceed about 1.3 million euros before tax, and foreign players no more than about 3 million euros. That system will take effect from this year, this season. So we can understand, to be frank, if apply salary reduction immediately after the application of such a salary cap system, it might be less sufficient for protecting the interests of players, both domestic and foreign players in Chinese clubs. So, and we also believe there may also be legal risks. And then again, you may have known, usually in China, that is a little bit different from many other countries maybe. The total income of broadcasting tickets, sponsorships, etc., will not cover more than 10% of a relegation team's expenses during a season, which means theoretically, even if the club does not have any such income during the season, it will not substantially affect investors or clubs' major financial interests. And last but not least, according to the current COVID-19 situation in China, the Chinese Super League is expected and is very likely to resume earlier than Europe or other regions. And the CFA has prepared various plans for the postponed competition to start. Actually, there are some news that the Super League may start at the end of June or early July. So that will be very interesting because the Chinese Super League may not be impacted that heavily, so we can understand it is somewhat untimely and less interesting for some clubs to talk about the reduction of salaries at this stage. So that's my presentation of our national measures affecting the players and coaches' contract under this difficult time. And thank you, Saleh and Ronan. And if you have some questions, don't hesitate to ask me.
Thank you, Ken. So we will move straight to Nan. So please, the mic with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nan Sato. I work with a Japanese law firm called Field R Law Offices. I'm currently in the East Coast US, but I work mostly in football in Japan and also do a lot of FIFA arbitration and occasionally CAS arbitration. So it's a great opportunity for me to be here. Thank you to Patricia and Ronan and Saleh for inviting me. First, because it's a good opportunity for me to get out of my pajamas, and it's the first time in a week that I brushed my hair, so it's good for me. And of course, more importantly, it's a fantastic opportunity for me to exchange ideas and information with my colleagues around Asia, Middle East, Africa. And I see that we also have a lot of attendees from different parts of the world. So I want to make sure to keep my presentation brief, so we have enough time at the end to actually go into more interactive exchanges to get information from the attendees as well. Because I know that there, in addition to the countries covered on this panel, there are also other countries in the Asia, Africa, and Middle East region that have some interesting movements. So I invite all the attendees to submit questions or comments or let us know what's happening in your jurisdiction. So my presentation will be broken down into three parts. One is what's the current status in Japan, in football in Japan. Two is what are the measures taken by the different stakeholders in football. And three is what we think will happen in the coming months and weeks. So first of all, in terms of the current status, as you know, Japan has declared a national state of emergency. So pretty much the whole country is shut down, although it's not a strict lockdown order like we have in Europe or the Americas. You know, because the situation of coronavirus is getting worse. So all J-League football matches after February 28th this year have been postponed. And the J-League has not decided what to do with matches after May 30th. We'll see, we have about another month to see how the situation develops and make a decision from there. But the J-League has expressed that they are considering now already the option of playing these matches behind closed doors after May 30th. And the Japanese Football Association JFA Championship has decided to reduce the numbers of games and clubs participating in the tournament this year. So usually they have 88 clubs participating and playing more knockout matches. But this year, the number is reduced to 50. And they're delaying the opening of the tournament from May to September with a much shortened knockout format. In terms of women's football, which is an area that's developing very quickly, both in Japan and internationally, the Japanese Nadeshiko League, which is the name for the women's league, has been suspended with no clear reopening date. So that's the situation with the different tournaments in Japan now. And the second part is the measures that are being taken by different stakeholders. First, the government. I understand that some governments have issued government financing support to employers and employees to make sure that the employees who have lost work due to coronavirus can claim unemployment benefits or other types of paid leaves. But in Japan, this is also the case. The government has announced emergency funding in the form of low interest and forgivable loans for companies to cover their operational expenses, including payroll costs. And the unemployment insurance also helps employers cover a pretty large percentage of their employees' salary while they're on paid furloughs. But in Japan, some of you might be aware, players and athletes are not considered employees under the current interpretation of the Japanese employment law. That means that the players cannot benefit from the government assistance. There's also, because the players are treated as independent contractors, there's a possibility for them to apply separately on their own with the government for funding to support their own operations in the meantime. And there's also nationally about $1,000, a little less than $1,000 US per person COVID-19 emergency payment issued to all Japanese residents, and of course players will be eligible for that. And in terms of federations and the J League, the J League has announced emergency funding in the form of collateralized loans to its clubs. And just 2 days ago, the JFA has announced that it entered into, or it, I guess, worked with the Mitsubishi UFJ Bank and agreed on a line of credit in the amount of $200 million US. Sorry, I'm looking at the number in Japanese. Give me a second. Sorry, 20 billion US dollars. 20 billion US dollars. So they announced that line of credit. They're working on that, and hopefully that will give the league so sufficient time to kind of operate in the meanwhile and provide enough funding to the clubs. Based on the announcement earlier this month, the J League is gonna give the clubs, depending on which level of the leagues the clubs are in, different amount of funding. So the J1 clubs will get more, J2 a little less, and J3 even less than that. And the J League has also applied with governmental financial entities for several billion US dollars in loan as well. So that should be able to carry them over for a little bit. And in terms of the clubs, there have been some discussions about cutting players' wages from the clubs, but no agreement has been reached. There's obviously a serious problem with cutting wages, like our colleague in China discussed, depending on how much the wages are cut, especially for players who made a lot of income the year before, because remember, they're liable to pay their taxes as independent contractors. So if they made a lot of money before and this year their tax liabilities will be due, and if they don't have enough money coming into the door, that could pose serious personal financial difficulties to these players. And also a lot of players, especially in the J2, J3 leagues, their salaries are not that high to begin with. So that's a serious consideration for some players. The clubs and the Players Association are expected to negotiate this issue in the coming months. Speaking of the Players Association, they have already expressed their reservations about the player salary reduction in light of the pay cut discussions. But again, there's no formal proposal made so far. The last that they announced at the Players Association is that they think there's more than one way for the players to make contributions to the game. So what this exactly means is yet to be seen, but it might suggest that the Players Association is going to work closely with the clubs and the leagues to try to figure out some sort of mutually equitable and inventive solution to the salary issue. And one issue that has come up a lot in many countries in the world is the force majeure clause in contracts. So generally speaking, under Japanese law, a party is exempt from its contractual obligations if its performance has been rendered impossible by a force majeure event. However, of course, the force majeure clause has to exist in the contract, and it has to be a situation that qualifies under the contract. Unfortunately, many contracts in Japan either don't have a force majeure clause or have a clause that does not cover epidemics and pandemics. The JFA, the Japan Football Association Standard Agreement, doesn't contain such a force majeure clause. So there's not a clear contractual decision on which way it would go. It will be left largely to negotiations. So I know that some of my colleagues later will discuss the FIFA guidelines and how that impact their country's decisions. So far, there hasn't been any official announcement by either the JFA or the J League on how they plan to work with the FIFA guidelines and to what extent they will comply with that. So it would be interesting to see that as well. And I know that on the webinar, we might have some colleagues from the JFA and J League with us. So if you have any up-to-date information, we would be happy to hear that, of course. And the last part of my presentation is focused on the future. So what is going to happen in the coming months and weeks as the coronavirus situation subsides a little bit? First of all, I think we will see some return to training movement. Like I said earlier at the beginning of the presentation, there is no strict lockdown order. People are asked or requested to stay home, but it's not an order. So some players have already returned to training on their own, making sure that they're observing social distancing measures and taking shifts, almost like a staggered shift. So like they take turns to go train. And I expect to see more of that and eventually the official training to resume. And two is that I think we'll see some collective bargaining efforts on the part of the Players Association and J League. And the clubs, of course. And that would be interesting to see what kind of negotiations they developed from there. And three is very unique to Japan. It's the professionalization of women's football. So before the coronavirus crisis hit, we had a lot of movement in women's football to professionalize the sport. And the JFA has set a goal to complete the professionalization by the 2021-2022 season. Because of the crisis, things are slowing down a little bit, but the preparation still continues. The company that was contracted by the JFA to execute the process hasn't made a lot of movement because everything is kind of slow and people are working from home. So I think it's good. There's a potential that it's going to be delayed a little bit, but honestly, we don't know yet. So that's something that people are keeping an eye on. And it's unclear how much progress has been made in the late months, but I invite you to also keep an eye on that issue because it's going to be a big change in Japanese football. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nan. Very interesting. So now it's my turn actually. So I'll be very brief, and I will stick to the 7 minutes. But I will also ask my colleague to stick to the time, so we allow longer period for the Q&A. So the situation in the UAE, in very brief, the UAE football stakeholders, namely the federation, were almost waiting for guidelines to come from FIFA. So once the FIFA guidelines was issued, UAE also have amended the player status committee circular that is issued at the beginning of the season, and put in place similar guidelines to the points that is highlighted in the FIFA guidelines. So first of all, the UAE League was suspended quite late on 15th of March. So until now, the league is suspended, and it was until yesterday, it was suspended to a further notice. But yesterday, the professional league announced that they are going to play the current league again just before the beginning of the next season, which is in August. So still there is a lot of debates about it, whether it's possible or doable. Also taking in consideration the weather in August is the hottest in the during the year in the UAE. So we will see, but if it started by August, it should be ending by mid of September, which is usually the second season already started. So they will postpone the second season to maybe end of September or early October, something around this. Anyway, the UAE circular have also referred to a reduction of 40% or not more than 40%. And they put in place similar criteria to the one FIFA has put as well. So that the reduction has to be equal for all players, reasonable, proportionate, and also that the club have worked hard to reach an agreement. So both players and clubs are encouraged to reach an agreement, but if there is a dispute, there is a criteria in place similar to the criteria that FIFA guidelines has also put in place. Similarly, the league will be postponed, and accordingly, the current contract that was supposed to expire by end of the current season, which was like around end of May, beginning of June, is to be postponed and extended to the end, the new end of the current season, which they have mentioned now as of August. Similar to the to the transfer window, it will be also moved further, and also all players that will be terminated or their contract will be expired during this crisis, they will be it will be possible for them to be registered at any time during this difficult time with any other clubs. So this is the situation in the UAE. As you know, we don't have also a players union, as my previous colleague from China has mentioned the same. So there is no proper dialogue between players and clubs. However, clubs are speaking to their players on club by club basis. We understand that some clubs have already reached an agreement with their players, both local and international. Definitely some will not accept, and we will see some dispute happening locally and internationally. Again, as also a last point I would like to highlight here, unlike the situation in Europe, and this is maybe similar to the situation in China, the clubs are not highly financially affected due to the suspending of the league, because their income stream is not majorly coming from, for example, match ticketing or broadcasting. So with this, I will conclude my speech, and I will give the mic to our colleague Bandar from Saudi Arabia to let us know the situation in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Saleh. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone here. Thank you for AIAF for arranging for this seminar. And thank you for all for your attendance. In Saudi Arabia, just let me to give a small brief because we have 7 minutes or 5 minutes to speak. And as I know, most of the people here in Saudi Arabia or who will be in the region, they are fasting. So we try to make it very fast and to all our colleagues. As we know, that COVID-19 is affect all the sector, whether government or private sectors. One of that is the football. In Saudi Arabia, in 15 March, the Ministry of Sport has been issued to decide to suspend the football in Saudi Arabia. I mean, for the whole of the football. Following that, SAF, Saudi Arabian Football Federation, and the Saudi Pro League has issued a circular to suspend the football as well. One important note I have to mention in the beginning, our national law, or which apply to the employment law, is not applicable to the player and coach. So in fact, so that it will be terminate for any dispute arising between the parties. It will be covered by the employment signed between the parties and the governing law, as well as the judicial body. It will be hearing the matters. Something is, I mean, as we see, the guideline has been issued from the FIFA. They consider the COVID-19 as a force majeure. But in fact, in Saudi Arabia, as you know, we have no civil law. Our civil law is the Sharia law. The Sharia law, they have an important thing. First of all, the force majeure and the state of emergency. What is the difference between the force majeure and the state of emergency? The force majeure means it is impossible to execution the contract. But for the state of emergency, it is difficult to execution the contract, which is considered now for the player contract. It is impossible to execution the contract, but you need to time maybe 6 or 8 or 2 months to be continue and to play. One the important thing, as most of the club in Saudi Arabia is supported by the government from the financially, the Saudi Pro League meet with their club and they discuss about the current situation, and they try to reach for an agreement with their player and with their coach, which is very important. One of main principles is the both should be respect of the contract. In fact, the Saudi Pro League clubs shareholder proposal, one important thing is they should be negotiation with the player and reach for an agreement, whether it is collective agreement or individual agreement. They decide to proposal 50% discount of the salary, reduction of the salary in the following way. The first, any player who has receiving 20,000 Saudi Riyal, he is not subject to reduction. Anyone who has receiving more than 20,000 Saudi Riyal, his salary, the 20,000 Saudi Riyal, it will not be reduction, but more than the 20,000 Saudi Riyal, it will be reduction 50% discount or 50% reduction of the salary. At this time, most of the club is still in negotiation with their player. Some club announcement, they have reached an agreement with their players for reduction for the salary for 50% discount. And one of main clause is that the reduction salary, it will be during the suspension of the sport activity in Saudi Arabia. Then when they get back, or when they're resuming the sport activity, then the salary will be back 100% as they have, or as they have mentioned in their play contract, or in the contract between the parties. In fact, something is very important, and should all the clubs here and the players should be understand. FIFA guidelines say that they recommend the club, player, coach reach for a collective agreement, which is very important. I think it should be the Saudi club following this guideline and try to reach for the settlement agreement with their player and amend the contract following that. But if you reach for an agreement, but in fact you didn't sign, so that means it's not affected as well. So this is one important thing I have to mention. In relation to the Saudi Football Federation, at this time, they decide to leave that decision for each club to take their decision. But we heard it yesterday in the news about the resuming of the football activity, that it may, as Saleh said, it may in the August as well in Saudi Arabia. And the second thing about the registration period is has not yet specified by SAF or Saudi Arabian Football Federation, which they need to be in contact with the FIFA. In relation to the extension of the contract, nothing has happened yet. So I think we will see difficulties, issues in the future with clubs, with the players, with the coaches. In the end, in the future, what can we see? As we are a lawyer, I think there may a dispute between the parties. It's one of the new cases as in my life as a lawyer. This is the first situation it's happened in the football. So let's say what the FIFA and the federation will be decide about the dispute. It will be considered as a force majeure, as the FIFA said, or it will be different country to countries. Thank you. Thank you, Saleh.
Thank you, Bandar. Thank you very much. Now we will move to our friend Ettore to let us know about the situation in Qatar. Ettore, the mic with you.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Saleh. Thank you very much to Ronan and Patricia for the kind invitation. Congratulations for the excellent initiative. I have been extremely happy to follow also the previous two webinars related to Europe and also America, and I really think was extremely interesting to have a comparative analysis of the situation from our qualified colleagues and friends of AIAF. Let me go now directly to the situation in Qatar, where I have to say that even though I am an Italian lawyer, I'm based since 2005. I am the legal director of the Qatar Football Association, and starting from 2018, also the managing partner at the MCA Sports Law LLP. Before going the brief about the current status and implementation of situation related to Qatari football, I would like to give a really brief overview of the current situation of the pandemic in Qatar, because I think this is important. I think that all of us as lawyers should start from an analysis of a situation which is absolutely complicated for governments, and therefore is even more difficult to be predicted for the football stakeholders. However, let me say that we cannot avoid to take in a serious analysis and consideration the current situation of the pandemic before analyzing. Now in Qatar, yesterday there were 11,311 active cases, positive cases, which if we compare to the total number of population, 2.8, is not a low percentage, and put Qatar as one of the highest countries in the world for number of positive cases. However, let me also say that thanking God, the serious cases and the number of deaths are very limited, also thanking the action taken by the government and the competent healthy authority. But this situation is of the positive cases is still growing. So this means that it is indeed very difficult to predict when the football activity could restart or could be back to a relative normality, even though we have then also to clarify well the meaning of normality in the future. However, currently all the sports activity in Qatar are suspended. The first suspension was officially communicated by the Qatar Olympic Committee on 14th of March and then extended 15 days by 15 days. Today, 30th of April, expire the last extension, and certainly it will be extended again for other 15 days or the longer period. We will see. Up to now has not communicated yet. And there are rumors that in the light of that, the training activity of players with club could start on 20th of May. And as also Saleh said for UAE, there are rumors, but again, nothing is still official and cannot be honestly communicated in the current situation related to the figures that I gave before, could start also in August with all the relevant complications related to the weather condition of the area. And also let me say, regarding the training of players, coaches, and all the staff, because there are not only players, of course, in a club, then could have an impact also on the will of this party, these stakeholders, to go back to work in a situation which is still not totally safe. Everybody says the safety is the first thing, so we have to keep in mind this. Now, I am not a qualified lawyer in the Qatari law. However, also here the labor law cannot be applied to football. The football player is governed as exceptional entities, and there is no definition of force majeure in the law. And in the standard template, which is however not mandatory for all the clubs with players, there is not a specific provision regarding the force majeure. What is important to say is that, however, in Qatar, and I think is the only countries in the Middle East, there is a Qatar Player Association, which has been established already some years ago, also because it's been established here a Qatar Sports Arbitrational Tribunal, which of course respect the guidelines given by FIFA with the equal representation also of players. Therefore, there is also this player association, and the player association in the past days has agreed with the Qatar Stars League, the league who governs the highest competition in the country for club, to go for a reduction of the salary. However, due also to the fact that there is no collective bargaining agreement, and in any case the player association has not a mandate to represent the players in this matter, then the clubs have to expressly agree with all the players about this possible reduction, which has been recommended and suggested, and that's the reason why we have also drafted a standard template will be circulated to the club. But again, this, as everywhere, as also clearly stated in the FIFA guidelines, there is the freedom of the party to agree about this, and therefore we will see what will be agreed. Let me also add that, as mentioned by Saleh, in the Middle East we have a little different situation, because at the end, you know, 70, 80, in some cases even 90% of the budget of the club are based of governmental contributions, subsidies, funds, so are not coming from the revenues of the commercial exploitation, TV rights, match ticketing, and any other kind of commercial revenues. This is, of course, an important aspect, because if from one side it's correct and absolutely unquestionable that in this period the players are not performing their activity, they are not providing services, football services to the club, it's also true that the reduction could be also justified in the moment in which then the incomes, the commercial incomes of the club are going down. Of course, if there are no matches or matches played with no spectators, the club suffer a decrease. If there is no match broadcasted, already all the TV broadcasters worldwide have said they will not pay, is more than legitimate. Then you can recall this situation and negotiate for a reduction of the salary. However, let me say, this is not totally the situation here. Therefore, we will see. There is also, in any case, a range of between the 15% of the 40% of the percentage, but let me say and emphasize that so far nothing has been officially stated yet and expressly agreed. So we will see what happened. And let me emphasize again that I really think is extremely important to go back and to analyze what is the current situation of the pandemic worldwide before taking any decision, also for the restart of the activity. Again, there is, in any case, the sport activity. All of us, we don't know when we will be able to be back to the normal life, working life, private life, when we will be able again to travel. And we as lawyers work in our safe environment, in our office. We will not have daily contact with others. In fact, sports activity have been considered as activity high risk. So I can see a sort of dichotomy now in this will, which is also legitimate, mainly from the football clubs, not only not only from them, but all the football stakeholders to push for go back to the past, to restart the activity, as all of us we would like to do. But honestly, I think that this is not so simple, or at least you can decide, you can talk, you can take action, but at the end, if the number of positive cases are still growing, there is still a diffusion. Now we are also, unfortunately, hearing that can be also a second wave of the pandemic. I honestly think that is a bit pleonastic to enter so much into the details and contract. For contract, we can talk about the extension, not only the reduction. Now, regarding Qatar, what has been decided? Originally, there was this utopia, dream to restart the activity, official activity, even in May. This, of course, is not possible. The majority of the country in Qatar, and not only in Qatar, in the Middle East, and at the end of May. So the idea was to extend the contract maybe up to the end of June. But so far the situation is pointless. So in general, the idea is that if then the league should start again in July or even in October, sorry, in August, as I said before, then that the players who have the contract expired is expired. So the clubs will start with the new contract, and the issue of the new contract is also, let me say something extremely interesting, because if we go to talk about the force majeure principle, which is something extremely interesting, I don't want to take too long time, and maybe we can discuss this with the further question, but let me say also something, because the issue of the force majeure, which is the base also of the FIFA guideline, recommendation, interpretation, suggestion, in any case, FIFA is clearly saying that for FIFA and football, COVID-19 is a force majeure. And per se, this per se leave a bit open. Honestly, the qualification, the definition of force majeure is not so simple, is not everywhere found. In English law, let me say that there is not any definition of force majeure. It made reference to contract or jurisprudence. And also, let me say that the analysis of jurisprudence of CAS about the force majeure is something very interesting. I have made a research. There are already some articles related to that. And I think there are 8 decisions from CAS. Only one, I think, is a case related to Egypt, and in particular to the civil war of 2012. And there was a coach who terminated the contract. The league was cancelled that season, and then he terminated the contract, making reference to the force majeure. This is the only case in which CAS recognized that this event was a force majeure event, and therefore the coach was legitimate to terminate the contract. But in all the other cases, the CAS panels have been a bit reluctant to recognize the force majeure. Now, the force majeure, and going back to what I was saying, it's extremely important looking at the past and the current situation, but we should look also to the future, because is COVID a force majeure cause for the future? Of course, no, because if we go to the basic or some of the definition given by the doctrine about the just cause is usually an irresistible and unforeseeable, is due to unforeseeable circumstances, and which made the performance of the contract impossible. So I think we should keep this in mind, and certainly for the future the situation changed, because now everybody are looking to the past and the present, and I think is correct. And I think also we will face many legal cases in the near future. But at the end, soon, the main issue will become the future, because then the club are close to the new season. And let me say, even though FIFA has given to the member association the freedom about the transfer window, which is a very important aspect, even though it will not be so simple then to govern internationally the situation, at the end, we will arrive soon at the new season, and the new season under new contract. And we are already facing problem of new contract, because of course, then, you know, the clubs would like to secure players, but then the players cannot sign contract until when they have also passed the medical check and nobody can travel. So I think that I have even been over my time. It was not easy to mention this. I have given just a brief, and of course I am at disposal of everybody for any further question or even deeper analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Ettore. Thank you very much. Now we will have our colleague Jean from Cameroon to give us briefly the situation in Cameroon.
Thank you, Moderator, Mr. Saleh. Thank you, Patricia. Thanks to all the team of the AIAF. I greet all the members of AIAF. I'm Jean-Jacques Nouyadjam, like you are saying. member of IAF since 1 year. So it's a pleasure for me to participate to this webinar, especially for the lawyer of a country like me, who have most of things to learn, because our country is, like we will say, our country have most to learn for other countries who have so long for this domain. So my plan will be just in 2 steps. The first will be to present the situation, the context of our country, and the second point I will tell you, just because in our country have just the federation have taken just one measure, so I will give you this measure. So like other countries in the world, our government in the 17 March have taken some measure concerning Corona, the pandemic. These measures including social distance and prohibition of any manifestation involving more than 50 people. The organization of sporting events could only be affected. On the same day, Cameroon Football Association, in the press release signed by its president, announced the suspension on further notice of all the competition organized at the national level, as well as a friendly match. It must be said that having made the health of the player a major priority, FIFA and CAF had, having made already recommend to the member association to suspend the competition they organize. Then it should be noted that the championship currently organized by the FECAFOOT is so-called professional championship, and the club supposed to be professional. Apart from that, club in Cameroon, in those in Central Africa sub-region live mainly on the state and federation subsidy, unlike professional club apart on the rest of the world. So we said club in Cameroon and even in the sub-region live on subsidy. The finance of the club as we see elsewhere is not relevant here because we don't deal with taking sponsorship, sell gadget. But the clubs do sign contract with player and coach, which have been paid for several years by the subsidy granted by the state. Due to the lack of the means, the salary of the football in Cameroon for a player of League One or Elite One is 150 euros per month. The salary of the player on League Two is 80 euros per month. Since the suspension of the competition, which is more than 1 month today, no consultation has taken place between Cameroon football and other actors. We have approached the Cameroon Football Association, the club, to see if they cannot anticipate, but at this time, no consultation has been taken. The only concrete measure taken so far by the Cameroon Football Association, and as it said in the press release, in consultation with other actors, is the special support granted to player and coach, about 65,000 euros. This sum will be distributed to 2,000 player and coach, which is up for the player. Each club have to send the name of 25 players for the League One and 20 player and coach for the women club. This is one time granted, which, as the federation say, aimed at the supporting the player who are living precarious conditions in this period of global health crisis. At the club level, the only club which has paid his player and coach salary is the League One club named Stade Rennais de Melun. For other clubs, under the pretext of the crisis, they have no yet pay, and neither consider contract suspend or renegotiate. Another club, League Two, who pay 70% of the salary is Ofta of Kribi. We also approached the Football Union to find out whether consultation had been initiated with the Union of Elite Club in order to anticipate the possibility of change the contract or salary suspension. At their level, no initiative had been taken at the time. It must be said that in our legislation, the possibility of partial unemployment is not envisaged. The labor case speaks only about technical leave. Now, it should be also say that the African Football Confederation gives until the 5th of May to the member of the FECAFOOT to know that if the competition will stop and will go on. So our federation have until the next week to say that if the competition will be stopped or if the competition will be go on. If the competition are stopped before the end of the season, it is clear that there will be a problem of early termination of employment contract aligned with the season and contractual commitment. There is no doubt that it is when the consultation will be take place and measure will be taken to safeguard the right of player and coach being in FIFA guideline. So like we have seen, you have seen, in our country there is no capital measure who have taken now to see if to see how to protect the contract of the player. For sure, when the consultation will be begin, they will take place under the guideline given by the FIFA. Until now, the only thing the federation have done is to put in place some amount for the player, like I told 60,000 euro, which when you see any player have to less than 100 euro. And if the situation stay until May or June, we don't know, maybe at this time, the federation and the other part will call some consultation to see how the measure they will take to protect the player and the coach. But until now, like you have seen, there is no capital measure who have been taken. So this is all what I can say concerning our country. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the time left, we will move straight to Nasr as a final speaker. Nasr, go ahead, and then we will have the questions, which is a lot of questions already asked in the Q&A.
Thank you, Saleh. Good morning, everyone. And it's hard to speak at the end after all experts already highlighted the matter. I will try to be short in order to allow the attendees to more discuss their questions. First of all, you know, in Egypt, like I thank first, of course, Patricia for making this initiative and arranging that with Ronan for making this webinar, which is very important for our region because to discuss these important matters to all the stakeholders in football. And we had the pleasure and we were delighted to host the last AIAF Congress in 2019. And I heard, of course, the bad news that we postponed our Congress for this year. So I was going to suggest to Patricia that maybe we put online our last Congress in this year, so people could be benefit also from the FIFA related matters related to artist fee. I will start with the current situation in Egypt. In Egypt, we always say that we have the Egyptian style or Egyptian way. So also in our situation with current status for suspending the leagues worldwide, you know, we have this experience. We had uprising events, and we had also one time that the football activity in Egypt was suspended for whole 1 year. So our clubs, I can say, and the players, they used in a way or another to similar situation and had experienced same this situation before. Also to play for the proposed behind closed doors. Also in Egypt, we had played for some seasons due to these political events behind closed doors. So we can say that the clubs now are more adapted to the financial status of losing some of their income. Regarding the situation for the Egyptian league, is the same like all other leagues, was suspended by the FA and of course the government of Egypt since mid of March, and until now they extend also the suspension until 15 of May. They extend every 15 days, same as Ettore was saying about the situation in Qatar or in another place, that they extend every time for more time, and we don't know until now when we can resume. But the FA had a meeting yesterday to discuss all possibilities or options to resume the league again, even we resume in July or in June. And of course, this depends on the updates, what will be happening. The only negative we had that in the Egyptian league, we still have 17 weeks to play. And this is like the most high number of weeks in all the region in Middle East and North Africa, because other leagues are ratio from 5 weeks maximum to 10 weeks. And this was despite we start our league in summer, like in September, we start our league. So we are not the system that we are starting in January, but we still have 17 weeks to finish. So according to that, we have difficulty to resume, but until now, or to finish the league, but until now there is no decision to cancel the league in Egypt. The Egyptian FA waiting the updates, of course, from the government, and if they can resume the league to finish this season before starting the new season. On the other side, we can speak about the CAF competition in general, because CAF sent to all the federations in Africa and gives them deadline until 5th of May to every federation can say what is the status of its league and what they are planning to resume the league or what they will do. Because of course CAF want to regularize the matter also for the CAF competitions. So there will be meetings in next month, and according to the information collected, maybe they will decide about how to manage the African clubs competitions. Especially we had good advantage that the African Champions League only remaining is semi-final in each competition and the final. So we speak about like 4 matches in the semi-final, 2 legs for each match, and for the final it's only 1 match. So we speak about total 5 matches for each competition, the African Confederation Cup or the African Champions League. So I think that CAF is waiting until football activity resume again in order to be able to complete the current African competition season, which is, I think, is advantage for our football in Africa. We speak about another point, which is the player contract time or term when it's finished. Because of this, if the player contract will finish this season and the season is extended to September or October. We had also in the Egyptian FA, good example, we can say, same as maybe my colleague before, Amin, was speaking about the contract in Turkey. In Egypt, we have a standard contract for all the players. So all the clubs have a standard contract printed from the Egyptian Federation. And this standard contract had main clauses or main articles in these terms in this contract. And you fill in just the term, the period, and the financial reward for the player. And you have at the end some special conditions if you want to add anything. So for the term of the contract, it starts from the beginning of season and you state which season, and it ends by the end of a season also. So we don't have this problem now because all the players' contracts in Egypt will be extended automatically according to the standard contract of the Egyptian Federation until the end of the season in September, whatever. So the clubs are not obliged to negotiate also with the player more salary in order to stay and finish the season, because in front of each season, they have the total remuneration for this season is X amount. This X amount is distributed in some installments. So at the end, the player to finish this season has a fixed total amount to be received by the player. So we don't have a problem. This is like a good example, I can say, from the Egyptian Federation, maybe because our previous experience, so we know that the season, you cannot be certain when it will end exactly due to these circumstances, but at the end, it helps us now that every club can hold its players without additional financial burden until the end of the season, and after that they can move to another club. Finally, for the most important, and I see many of the questions, so maybe we will be discussing that more after that with the questions related to the reduction or amendments of the players' contracts from the financial terms. We had in the Egyptian civil law, I think same as in many other countries, certain circumstances where we have force majeure situation or unforeseen events that allow some measures for the employer to reduce or end the contract of the players or of the employee until, of course, with different consequences. But we can say, because the question, do we have now force majeure situation in Egypt related to the contracts, or is it just an unforeseen event that allow maybe reduction only for the player contract? For the current situation, we know that the season is suspended. All the clubs are closed by the government decision. So the players are staying at home. There is no trainings, no matches. So we speak about now in the current status, we have an unforeseen event because the Egyptian Federation still not canceled the season or suspended or canceled the next season to be resumed after that. So in this situation, the Egyptian law allows the employer to reduce the players or the employees' contract up to maximum of 50% according to the labor law of Egypt. And for what's actually happening on the ground in Egypt, FA didn't issue any decisions related to the financial salaries of the players. So they are waiting to see whether the league will be resumed or not in order to maybe put something in that. So now it's up to the clubs and the players to negotiate. And actually, many clubs had agreed with the players for reduction. It could be vary from 25% to 50% from the salary during the suspension of the league until it's resumed. And other clubs who had like better financial status postpone any reduction for 4 months, saying that after 4 months we will see what is the situation. If that after that we decide about the reduction. And for now, for these 4 months, they say will not pay the full salary, but you still the player entitled to receive this salary later on. So this is like deferral for the salary, part of the salary, of course, until 4 months to re-evaluate the situation according to the updates. For me and the Egyptian Federation, when decide about these matters, because according to the Egyptian players' contract, the Egyptian Federation is entitled to review any claims from national players. And of course, as FIFA also will be competent for the international players' cases, and FIFA guidelines stated that players should negotiate with clubs or clubs negotiate with players first, and this will be taken into consideration what is the value of the damage caused to the club. And I think that is now fulfilled. So the foreign players may be referred to FIFA according to their guidelines and of course the national law. But the Egyptian Federation, usually with previous experience, they approved, I think, maximum of 25% reduction when we had the revolution before and the suspension of the league. So if the situation now, what will be the updates, we still don't know. But we had some initiatives from the players union in Egypt because we don't just speak for players about the Super League in Egypt. We also have the lower divisions, which of course the clubs are more affected because there is no income enough to the players, to the clubs to pay the salaries. So the player union in Egypt with the sport ministry of Egypt issue a fund in order to help these players in lower divisions to support the players from the financial status. But for the first division, I think that the federation is waiting to see the outcome if the league will be resumed. They are planning now to resume the league in, I can say, in next July or August, and to finish the league before starting the new season. And one more important thing also, I speak about the labor law and the civil law. The labor law Article 41 speak about the possibility to the employer to reduce the salary for 50% if the employee cannot fulfill its work due to unforeseen event. Of course, to be extra, to be for due to a foreign cause, not related to the employer itself. But the important question I want to conclude now, because not to take more time, what I see is that some of the national federations already terminated or canceled the current season. And maybe this was Patricia, I think 2 days ago, was saying that maybe the French league will be canceled, and how the remaining leagues will decide in other top European countries, that all of them want to resume, of course, the league. And I see the situation, we had to look at it from the bigger vision. Because what if we cancel the current season and then we reach until end of the year without football activity resumed normally? Because we see, for example, the FIFA medical chief, when he just said 2 days ago that we see that football activity could be not returned until end of September. So what if this extended until the people can prepare for a new season, and you reach December and you didn't resume to start the new season again? What will be the effect of the new season? And you have in next summer 2021 the Olympics and the European Championship. So would be that enough period to start a new season 2021 and finish before the summer, or is better to wait, not to decide about the, and also the players are very important, that they be also accepting to play and start to participate, because also there is, of course, cautions or doubts for the players about their health. So I think that the better solution is to wait to see when this pandemic will end and we resume the football activity. Because if this was not ended before, for example, November or December, maybe the better solution for most of the countries to resume and complete the current season that was not ended, and after that you can have in summer the international competitions, and maybe deferral for one season to start again after next summer. So this is a point that we should also consider, because canceling this league and wait until the end of the year without starting a new season could make us in a position that every next season also not be start and finish before the summer, and will cause more problems for all clubs. Thank you, Saleh, and thank you, Patricia, and of course we'll be happy to respond to any questions about that.
Thank you very much, Nasr. We almost have 23 minutes left to the 2 hours. I don't know if we can stay longer or not. I would like actually just to comment quickly from where Nasr just ended, and also refer back to what Ettore was saying at the beginning, that this pandemic is evolving and is changing from time to time. It's really, I mean, experts, I mean, scholars and doctors are not able to give us guideline where this is going. So I think we will have no choice but to wait, see how it will, because also, as you suggested, Nasr, if you bring the current season to be played later on, we will also get rid of an entire season, but more or less it might be the case as well. So now we will move to the questions, and so we allow the most important debatable part of this webinar to start, and we will let every participant who already raised his question to ask the question directly. So we will start with Pedro. Pedro, you can go ahead.
Patricia, hello Saleh, hello Ronan. Hello to all the other speakers and attendees. We heard very interesting feedback from all of you. And of course, there are special circumstances in each jurisdiction. I would say even in each country, the clubs should treat each situation differently. We have here some consideration in terms of force majeure. We have also some consideration in terms of financing models, because in particular countries like China, like Saudi Arabia, where I am, Qatar, UAE, the financing model of the clubs is different. But my question to the speakers from these countries in particular, my apologies, I don't know much about the funding of clubs in other jurisdictions, but again, for Jean in China, for Saleh in UAE, Bandar in Saudi, and Ettore in Qatar, there is of course force majeure, and the main reason for the players to come to these countries and have very high salaries is that they play. It is unquestionable that they are not performing. Some of them are not even training. All of us, I think, we have experience in dealing with termination cases where the player terminates the contract because he's not playing. So here, it's obvious that the player is not playing or not even training because of force majeure, and it's not due to the clubs. So isn't this a clear case of force majeure under civil law, principles of public law, Sharia principles? Can't we argue here that in fact clubs are entitled to go to the clubs and to the players, and players need to be reasonable and accept that there are conditions to a situation to reduce salaries, and ultimately, as bullet point number 3 in FIFA guidelines, to make an unilateral decision either by national law or because the players still refuse, and it's obvious. And again, putting aside financing models, and why do I mention this? Because either the money comes from the government, from sponsors, directly or indirectly, everyone is affected, because the revenues either to the government or to the sponsors are not coming in. So again, this is my question. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Pedro. So I don't know if any of our colleagues would like to answer this, but quickly commenting from my point of view, it's of course, it's not possible to give a full comprehensive feedback to your deep question. So yes, I totally agree that from this pandemic, the entire world is affected, including government. So it's not only about that the revenue stream that comes from football is affected, is also any fund received by clubs. If it's affected, it should be take us to the same situation of not being able to pay the full salary to the clubs. Also, this take us, I don't know, someone was also referring in the comments on the side that if a club also owned by a billionaire, for example, maybe in Europe, so if a player accepts the salary cut, then it's only benefiting the pocket of this billionaire. I totally disagree with this, because in Europe, each club is an independent, separate entity, and they have the financial frame. So that billionaire cannot fund as much as money during the normal day. So how come he will fund now during this crisis? The club is, although is owned by a billionaire or a billionaire company, so but it has its own budget and it has a financial fair play, for example, in Europe. So they have to stick with it. So, but going back to UAE precisely, I am in favor of keeping football within football. So for the football and sports specificity, football clubs, football players are not part of the jurisdiction of the state court, correct? So the the UEFA circular, and this is I'm also answering Daniel Majdi, who has also asked a question, similar question. I'm trying to bring them together. Clubs who's now deducting 40 or less than 40%, they will try to understand the circular that is issued by the UAE Football Association that it's allowing the club to reduce up to 40%, even if the player doesn't accept that reduction, if the club strictly fulfill the conditions and the criteria mentioned in that circular. Maybe Ettore, you want to elaborate more in that question of Pedro?
Yes, thank you. A few words which can develop what I was briefly saying before. The question is interesting and also extremely important, but let's try to analyze from the legal perspective. Now, we start first of all from the principle of the pacta sunt servanda, which is the base also of the majority of the decision from CAS in contractual dispute. So now we have to see what is stated in the contract regarding this case, the force majeure, if any, the possibility of a reduction. But suppose that there is no a clause in the contract. What we need to check, what is stated also by the national law in these specific circumstances or in general, but could even be possible that then the national law, and be careful because we have always to look at not the national law of the contract where it is performed, but let me say first of all to the national law to which the contract is governed by. And then as conclusion of that, we can look at the jurisdiction, to the jurisprudence. And if we look at the jurisprudence of CAS, there are, I have seen from 2014 until 2018, 8 decisions. Then even though the panels recognize the principle of force majeure, even though when there is not a specific clause governing the force majeure in the contract concerned, they have been very resistant, very reluctant to recognize that there is a force majeure for terminating the contract or also for reducing the payment. So at the end, even FIFA in its guidelines make reference to what? Recognize the principle that COVID-19 is a force majeure. Then put this clarification that you have, it's per se, so you have to evaluate case by case. But at the end, what they say, general principle, that with reference to the reduction of salary or amendment to the agreement, in case you have applied, have done in good faith, with in a reasonable way and with proportionality. But in the case in which this should not happen, so if the parties should not reach a mutual agreement, then the party should enter in a dispute. Let me say that if the club should apply a reduction of salary, which is not supported by the contract, is not supported by the national law, and is not mainly supported by the agreement, has not been accepted by the player, should pay the full amount at the end of the story.
Okay, let's move to the other question, to the next question, which was asked by, Ronan? Gustavo, I believe.
Gustavo Pinero.
Yes. You can ask the question.
Connect him.
Welcome, Gustavo. You may ask the question directly. Gustavo, we can't hear you.
Hello. Now you can hear?
Yes,
Okay.
now go ahead.
Excellent. First, congratulations for the initiative. The webinar is excellent and very useful for all of us that work in several countries. So it's a very good initiative. I would like to pose two questions actually. One is regarding the funds. We are discussing that I have some clients in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East, and it seems to me that they rush the issue about the reduction of salaries, because in one way, it's not clear why they need to reduce the salaries, because if they are not subject to revenues from ticketing, sponsorship and television, it's not clear, at least not explained clearly by the FA, why they need to reduce the salaries. And the second point is, I believe that most of the contracts are established by season. So until we define if the season will end or not, it's not possible to determine if we have force majeure or not, because we may still be able to fulfill the full contract. These are the questions, and I'd like to hear about your view from our colleague from Saudi Arabia, or anyone else that might be interested to answer that.
Thank you, Gustavo. Bandar, you want to answer? I'm happy also to give some points about it, but you refer to Saudi Arabia.
Okay, just if I correct, I understand the first question, why is the Saudi Arabia club reduction the salary? They are not yet reducing the salary. They are in the negotiation with the players and coach to reduction the salary. Why? Because they are in the difficult financial situation. So because as we know, the COVID-19 is not affect just some part of the world, that it has been affect all the clubs in the world, and the Saudi Arabia is a part of the world, and it really affect the economy, it really affect the sponsorship with the club. As you know, there is no fans attend the game, so there is no enough income like before the situation. So this is the first the question, but the second question, so I didn't hear from you. So what was your question?
Second part was regarding the force majeure, because in the guideline passed by the FA, they said the FIFA recognized as force majeure. In my opinion, it's a little bit early to say that, because the contracts are established by season. And therefore, if the season is not concluded and maybe still be concluded, there is no reason to recognize so far the force majeure. If you are still able to fulfill your contract, there is no force majeure. So the guidelines passed by the Saudi Arabian FA establish as already concluded as a final decision that there is force majeure. And I'd like your view on this point.
Okay, I get it your point here. So as we know, the guideline from the FIFA, they say that clearly that it's force majeure. But if you can see what I say in the beginning of my word, I say that we are in Saudi Arabia, we are apply for Sharia principle. So there is a difference between the force majeure and the state of emergency. In my opinion, at this time, it will be difficult to be said this is its force majeure due to the current situation. As you know, the player can be get back to the training after 2 or 1 month. But in fact, the force majeure and the state of emergency, it should be analyzed case by case, and it should be decided by the national DRC if the case it will be before the Saudi Arabian Football Federation, and that will be decided by the judge.
Also, I would like to add some comments here, Gustavo. The force majeure consequence, not necessarily to end the relationship as a termination. The force majeure is an unforeseen situation which can postpone the obligation of both parties, where both parties have, is impossible for them to fulfill their obligation currently, while there is a force majeure, or if we call it while the league is suspended. So the consequence of the force majeure can be also temporarily. So in the UAE, for example, last night, just yesterday, that I still don't have further info about it, they announced that they will resume the league again by August. I'm not sure if they will stick to it or not. So what about from now to August? Do they have the right to make a reduction or not? The answer is as per the FIFA guidelines as well as the UAE circular. Back to your first point about the fund, I think it's because it will be taken case by case. So it's very important for any football club to establish their financial status, regardless whether their fund comes from directly from football or from other revenue streams. So they need to establish a proper financial report to show the DRC later, whether the local DRC or FIFA DRC, that they were clearly affected financially due to coronavirus. Anyone from the team would like to highlight or give input here?
This is Nan. I just want to say a couple words here. So I totally agree with you, Gustavo. First of all, I think the FIFA in its guidelines, it says, COVID-19 is per se force majeure. I think that statement is almost a little misleading in that sense, because in the same guideline, it also says that the parties, if there's a collective mean of bargaining, then you have to try to figure it out collectively. And then you also have to look at national law to see how such a situation is dealt with. And then even on the top of that if it can't be resolved through those, you still can't easily change the terms of the contract unilaterally unless certain criteria are met. So I think you raised a very good point, Saleh, that the solution, the consequence of force majeure is not necessarily immediate termination. So I think I'm actually working on a case where a player from Japan is in dispute with an Indian club exactly about this issue, because the club terminated his contract claiming force majeure, and there's no force majeure clause in his contract. And they're saying, FIFA says in its guidelines it's per se force majeure, so we can terminate. But I think in a situation like this, there's a good argument to be made that the club at least has the obligation to work with the player and explore other measures that might be less drastic than terminations or a large reduction of salary.
Okay, so let's move to next question from, I believe, from Michele. So, Ronan, can you put our...
Yes, she's connected. It's Michelle Shai.
Hi.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Sorry, we say Michele, so it's fine. Nice. How are you doing?
Hi, good. Just a question for the panelists. Since the pandemic, we have seen a lot of governments obviously coming out with stimulus packages for a lot of the other industries. Are the panelists aware of any governments who have actually come out with specific stimulus package for the sports industry?
Not in the UAE. I'm happy to hear others. The answer seems no.
And not in Japan either. I think the reason for that is there's so many businesses that are starving for money and they're all bleeding money. So I think at this point, the government's priority is on small, medium-sized businesses rather than sports clubs, unfortunately.
Either not in China, because clubs are still waiting for the opinions and measures taken by the Chinese Football Association, but the governments, they don't put measures specifically for our football industry. There might be some measures for of some incentives for small and medium enterprises, but for now we don't see any specific measures for supporting or paying the football industry.
Okay. So, which question left, Ronan?
We have one question from Mr. Tulagagno Guashubelwe. Not sure of the pronouncing. I tried to connect him.
Okay. Okay, this is about UAE as well, I think. I can read his question if you want.
Yes.
Oh, here we go. Then he can ask the question.
Oh, we cannot hear him. Maybe I can read the questions. What recourse do players have when they don't agree with salary cuts deductions? What are the possibilities that you might establish tribunals in line with FIFA DRC to help resolve any dispute that might arise as a result?
Yeah, I don't know if I understand his question correctly, but it seems he's referring to the local players. Otherwise, international players, of course, they will go to FIFA DRC. But for local players in the UAE, the situation is very clear. They also have the jurisdiction to go to local DRC, and the local DRC will apply the new circular issued by the UEFA in line with FIFA guidelines. This is the answer if this was his question.
Okay, thank you, Saleh. I think we are done with the questions.
There are some questions, or one or two questions earlier.
Ramon Valencia.
I already answered his question. Yeah, there's a question also from Ramon.
Yes, I tried to connect him.
Okay. It has quite some details. I'll read it as well.
Ramon, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, everybody. First of all, congratulations to the association for this magnificent initiative. Thanks, Ronan, thanks, Patricia, and thanks as well to all the colleagues in the panel and the attendants. My question goes specifically to the UAE College. Saleh, as I understood in your explanation, current championship has just been postponed to August. Therefore, I wonder, which is the situation from a legal perspective of those players and specific foreigners whose contract end or terminates on next July, which could be expected the championship to be terminated, and therefore, if you know if there any national law or the federation is going to enact any rule which could oblige those contracts to be extended, or otherwise, as I consider, these issues fall under the scope of a private agreement under civil law. So they would need the player consent either in order to be extended, and in that case, is that if they are obliged to extend the relationship with the clubs, if they are gonna receive or they can ask for an extra payment for those time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Roman, for the question. Yes, in the same circular that was issued by the UAFA, those contracts, I believe you mean that they will be naturally expired by July or by June, not terminated. So if they are expired, they, as per the circular, they will be extended to the end of the new date of the current season ending. So as per the circular, they will be extended. And I believe the UAFA tried to rely on the definition was mentioned in the FIFA guidelines that the contract, any player contract is on season basis. So when the season was supposed to be June, so they might put the date of June. But if that season for the current, for example, scenario have been extended to July or August or other month, so this means that the contract was meant to be to the end of the current season. So the contract will be extended, and the club and the player will be entitled for the same condition of his contract, remuneration-wise as well. Okay, Ronan, maybe we go to other question if there's any other question.
Yes, one from Emad Anainek, who is a member from Jordan. She's connecting.
Okay. Also, there is another interesting question from Hassan Abdullah about pending or outstanding payments, or maybe a payment that was entitled before the suspension of the league. Can a club consider it as that they are not paying now because of the current force majeure or the current situation? Maybe Nasr Azzam would like to answer this, because I see we cannot see this Imad yet. Arona?
Yes, thank you, Saleh. Yes, yes. I believe related to former outstanding amount salaries before the start of the pandemic of COVID-19 will not be subject to these new conditions. So the former dues before this pandemic will still be due in full. And we just speak about the possibilities related to reduction or cancellation of any financial due for any player after the start of the pandemic. And as we all agree that still the situation is ongoing, you cannot specify. And I think that it will be case by case situation, because, for example, there is a player, maybe his contract will end by the end of this year, 2020. And in countries like in Africa, we have seasons started in February or March and end in October. So what if the player sign a contract in February for one season and the season didn't start or just start 1 week and didn't finish until the end of the contract? So maybe you speak about a force majeure situation that the employer could resign from fulfilling the total of the financial obligation under this contract due to a certain force majeure to the total period of the contract. So I think the situation will vary from one case to another, but related to former outstanding amounts, it will not be affected by these new measures. Just something to also to conclude, for a question from Daniel, our colleague from Egypt and Emirates, about the situation in Egypt, because we said that we still have half season not played. So of course, same, when you have half the season not played, the financial income of the clubs, we can say it's affected merely like 50% from the income if this season was not continued. So of course, this is high damage to the clubs. And still the federation didn't take an action or measure, same as in Saudi or Emirates, to propose some reduction with some percent, because they are waiting to see if the season will be resumed or not. And as I said before, they are leaving this to be resolved between players and clubs amicably. And of course, any reduction during the suspension period of the league will be subject, if any or dispute, if they don't agree, and it went to dispute whether in FIFA DRC or national DRC, they will apply the general rules, whether there was negotiation, how the reduction was done according to FIFA guidelines or the national laws with a percentage. So it will be subject also to a review by the DRC. So I see that the clubs will not agree. They still can take measures to reduction, but should be in line with the damages that they really had. And that's why I said in Egypt, the clubs had different measures. Some clubs make just deferral for some of the dues, and others make reduction 50% and others make 25%. So each club act according to its financial status with their players.
Thank you, Nasr. Now we have the final question will be asked directly to the speakers from Imad Hanaina from Jordan. Fadal Imad, welcome.
Yeah, all right. Hi, everybody, and thanks, Saleh. Actually, I would say we are now in temporary force majeure. So it's not very clear, and I think everybody agrees with me. My point of view is, isn't that decrease in players' dues only, is it only on the monthly salaries, or the value of the whole contract, which is, you know, some contracts, maybe clubs, they should pay half of the contract at the end of the contract, at the end of the season, I mean. So, are we on the decrease of the salaries, of the players' salaries as the whole contract, or the temporary time, which is will be as a force majeure? Yeah. Hello? I can't hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes,
Saleh,
yes,
I can't hear you. Yeah, go on.
Yes, we hear you. Thank you for your question. I was saying maybe any of our speaker would like to take the question. Qing, Nan, or Ettore?
Yes, okay, let me give an answer. This is, in any case, a question pertinent, but which should be answered looking in general at the structure of a contract, in the sense that that even though you call this amount as down payment, whatever, at the end, not salary, but at the end what is a remuneration which the club pay to a coach or a player for the services received. If then this payment is paid in monthly installment, or at the end of the contract, or at the beginning of the contract, and is not related to performance bonuses like the number of goals scored, but okay, I think that then this doesn't change. So from my perspective, the value of the contract is the total amount of the contract and the amount that has to be taken into consideration. So if there is the possibility to apply a reduction because the player has agreed the national law or through a specific agreement, and then it depends what is stated. Otherwise, the amount has to be paid. The fact that it's paid at the beginning or monthly doesn't change. But again, I think that you have to look at the contract and what the party agreed. Otherwise, unilaterally, I don't think that is legitimate then the deduction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ettore. So Ronan, I think you are bringing us one more question as well from Tariq.
Yes.
Okay, this will be exception from our true moderator, or the moderator behind this great webinar. And also any speaker can take the lead and answer the question once the question is asked, if it's more into your area. Or maybe Ronan, you can read the question if he's not available to join.
Well, I don't have the question precisely.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the question also, but other interventions.
He's connecting, but I don't know what's happening. No.
He's trying to refer to the insurance, I think. So anyone would like to just conclude by, or here we go. Tariq is here. Tariq, just quickly, if you don't mind, because we just took the last question. So you are the last question. We cannot hear you, Tariq. We cannot hear you, Tariq. Maybe it's a mute. Okay, I think from what he has written, he has rather intervention, sports insurance. So he might want to refer to the insurance because we are in a crisis and insurance might be relevant in some cases. So any of our speaker would like to just give a quick point about this? Nasr?
You speak about the insurance.
Yes.
I believe, of course, insurance is very important to protect the financial stability of clubs in situations like that. Because if we speak about cancellation of the leagues and still the clubs are obliged to fulfill payments to the players, even if it's partially, and in the times that maybe they don't receive salaries. So insurance is an important solution to cover these future salaries to players. In the Egyptian Federation, for example, they ask when you register every player to make insurance, but this insurance is very minimal, like it not covered the salary of the player, so it can be taken into consideration like it just procedures, but at the end it's not covering a real insurance for players in case of this force majeure situation to cover the players' salaries. And of course, in some countries, maybe some clubs, they have full insurance to cover the full salaries for players because they have, of course, high amount of salaries in Europe, for example, and this could like stabilize the situation for clubs, and it's important situation to be considered by clubs for future. And I don't know what the situation in Saudi or in Africa, but I think that most of the African countries and in Middle East, they don't have a real insurance that cover losses of the club or the obligations of the club in case of force majeure like that. So it will be some of clubs in Egypt, the top clubs was, 10 years ago when we had this revolution and suspension of the league for 1 year, they think about making better insurance to cover all the salaries of the players, but then they put, of course, higher burden financially to pay every year. And then I think it didn't work because not the clubs, especially in Africa, can bear the insurance costs every year to cover that. But at the end, we see in this pandemic now happening, it was very important if the club and employer had insurance to cover the salaries of the players in this situation.
We have reached to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers. Thank you very much for your thoughts and input. Also, I would like to thank all our attendees and participants and for their questions and for joining us in this webinar. And of course, to thanks Ronan and Patricia for the organization of this webinar. Thank you all.
Just one word, Saleh. Thank you to all our speakers, our AIAF members. I know that you have prepared and you dedicate your precious time to share your experience, your knowledge with all of us. So thank you very much. And I would like to give a special thanks to our partner, which is Football Legal, represented by Ronan. They've made a fantastic job because we just had the idea of these 3 webinars. I had the idea 10 days ago. So in 10 days, I call him and they manage everything. It is very successful. And I would like also to announce that Football Legal is going to release a special report. I don't know, maybe Ronan can tell us a special report about COVID-19, football and COVID-19, and this would be also very interesting, and this special report will rely on all our debates, the debates we had today, yesterday, and the day after yesterday. So thank you all, and thank you, Ronan.
Thank you, Patricia. Yes, in just a few words, we decided to change the special report for the next upcoming edition of Football Legal. And we decided, because of the situation, to dedicate it to COVID-19. So yes, we are working on that, and it's a great work, and I hope it will be useful to all the football family. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today, and hopefully there will be some other AIAF webinars in the next coming days or weeks. Just the time to see which topic we are going to address. Thank you very much to all of you and to all the attendees and participants. Thank you.
Thank you.